Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nitai Go Premanandi. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimati Divine Grace Shila Bhai Chanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimati Divine Grace Shila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Swami Maharaj Shila Prabhupada Ki. आनंद कोरी वैष्णव वृंद की नामचार शिला हरिदास ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ राधा कुंज श्याम कुंज की गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की मथुरा धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की मायापुर धाम की गंगा माई की यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी की श्री युग धर्म हरि नाम संकीर्तन यज्ञ की श्री प्रभुपाद ट्रांसलेंडल बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की श्री प्रभुपाद ट्रांसलेंडल प्रसारम डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की निताय गौर प्रेमानंदेर ऑल ग्लोरी टू द असेंबल्ड डिवोटीज हरे कृष्ण all glory to the assembled devotees Hare Krishna all glory to the assembled devotees Hare Krishna all glory to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga Namo Vishnu Hare Krishna Pita Bhakti Prabhu Shri Shri Guru Raja Pramana Sastra Vigita Sadhara Samtayam Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for coming this morning to Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are reading from Canto 4, Chapter 5, titled Frustration of the Sacrifice of Daksha. And we'll be reading a series of verses, but the verse that we'll start or we'll recite collectively is verse number 13. And then I'll read all the way up to 21 along with the purport. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we'll chant text number 13, and then once everyone's done, then we'll read through the following verses. So text 13. Tava sarudanuchare mahamakho Nana yude vamanakai ruda yude Pingai pishangai makarodaranae Paryada vidurana varudyata Tava sarudanucharar mahamako. Nana yudai vamanakaruda yude. Pinge pishange makarodarane. Paryaravad bhir vidurana varudyata. Tava sarudanuchare mahamako. Nana yuder vamanakaruda yude. Pinge pishange makarodarane. Paryadavad vidurana varudyata. Word for word translation. Tavat, very quickly. Sa, that. Rudra Anuchare, by the followers of Lord Shiva. Mahamaka, the arena of the great sacrifice. Nana, various kinds. Ayudhe, with weapons. Vamanakaye, of short stature. Udayude, appraised. Pinge, blackish. Pishangaye, yellowish. Makara udara ananaye, with bellies and faces like sharks. Paryadravadbhi, running all around. Vidura, O Vidura, Anvarudyatha. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. My dear Vidura, all the followers of Lord Shiva surrounded the arena of sacrifice. They were of short stature and were equipped with various kinds of weapons. Their bodies appeared to be like those of sharks, blackish and yellowish. They ran all around the sacrificial arena and thus began to create disturbances. So I'll read the translations for verses leading up to the verse number 21, then I'll read the 21 verse and the translation and purport. 14. Some of the soldiers pulled down the pillars which were supporting the pandal of sacrifice. Some of them entered the female quarters. Some began destroying the sacrificial arena, and some entered the kitchen and the residential quarters. 15. They broke all the pots made for use in the sacrifice, and some of them began to extinguish the sacrificial fire. Some tore down the boundary line of the sacrificial arena, and some passed urine on the arena. 16. Some blocked the way of the fleeing sages, some threatened the women assembled there, and some arrested the demigods who were fleeing the pandal. 17. Maniman, one of the followers of Lord Shiva, arrested Bhrigu Muni, and Veerabhadra, the black demon, arrested Prajapati Daksha. Another follower, who was named Chandesha, arrested Pusha. Nandishvara arrested the demigod Bhaga. 18. There was a continuous shower of stones, and all the priests and other members assembled at the sacrifice were put into immense misery. For fear of their lives, they dispersed in different directions. Text 19. Veerabhadra tore off the moustache of Bhrigu, who was offering the sacrificial oblations with his hands in the fire. Verse 20. Veerabhadra immediately caught Bhaga, who had been moving his eyebrows during Bhrigu's cursing of Lord Shiva, and out of great anger thrust him to the ground and forcibly put out his eyes. Text 21. Pushno hi abhadya dantan kalingasya yata balaha sapyamane garimani yohasad darshayan datam. Translation: just as Baladev knocked out the teeth of Dantavakra, the king of Kalinga, during the gambling match at the marriage ceremony of Aniruddha, Veerabhadra knocked out the teeth of both Daksha, who had shown them while cursing Lord Shiva, and Pusha, who by smiling sympathetically had also shown his teeth. Purport. Here a reference is made to the marriage of Aniruddha, a grandson of Lord Krishna's. He kidnapped the daughter of Dantavakra, and thereafter he was arrested. Just as he was to be punished for the kidnapping, the soldiers from Dwarka arrived, headed by Balaram, and a fight ensued amongst the Kshatriyas. This sort of fight was very common, especially during marriage ceremonies, when everyone was in a challenging spirit. In that challenging spirit, a fight was sure to occur, and in such fights there was commonly killing and misfortune. After finishing such fighting, the parties would come to a compromise, and everything would be settled. This Daksha Yagya was similar to such events. Now all of them, Daksha and the demigods, Bhaga and Pusha and Bhrigu Muni, were punished by the soldiers of Lord Shiva. But later everything would come to a peaceful end. So this spirit of fighting between one another was not exactly inimical. Because everyone was so powerful and wanted to show his strength by Vedic mantra or mystic power, all these fighting skills were very elaborately exhibited by the different parties at the Daksha Yagya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Shute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna. So I'll read the verse again. Text 13. My dear Vidura, all the followers of Lord Shiva surrounded the arena of sacrifice. They were of short stature and were equipped with various kinds of weapons. Their bodies appeared to be like those of sharks, blackish and yellowish. They ran all around the sacrificial arena and thus began to create disturbances. So the purport that we just heard from was text number 21. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada very interestingly writes, this sort of fight was very common, especially during marriage ceremonies. And in the end, everything would come to a peaceful end. So just imagine if you have a ceremony or some sort of celebration, and you have some guests who come and they start fighting. And then everything is put into commotion, and then in the end they all come to some sort of peaceful settlement, and then they walk off. And you're left there to pay the bills. How would you feel? I was listening to His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, who spoke on these series of verses. And he's describing that this pastime, Daksha Shiva pastime, is happening at a very interesting phase, section of the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam, the first canto, has some reference to, Krishna and his Dwarka pastimes when he leaves. But the second canto speaks about the Virat Rupa. The third canto speaks on the Sankhya philosophy. And if you look at this pastime, one of the most astonishing things is that there's no Krishna or Vishnu involved here. It's not directly. We'll see later. Vishnu appears in the sacrifice, so he comes. And then fifth canto talks about the cosmology, and then sixth canto speaks about Jamil, and then from seventh canto onwards we see the Lord and the reciprocation with Prahlad Maharaj, and then from there on it's leading up to the crest jewel, which is the 10th canto, which deals on Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. So the Bhagavatam is taking us towards Krishna, with actually gearing our attention or our meditation towards Krishna, and this pastime happens, and we're thinking, what's the essence? What's the purpose that we should actually imply for ourselves? Just 3 days ago, as Grace Mahatma Prabhu was here, and he was describing the verse that he spoke on, was speaking on Shiva Tejas, or translated as the mode of ignorance, and we see the followers of Lord Shiva actually doing exactly that. They're just running around, pulling things apart, making a mess of things, And then prior to that we saw Brahma Tejas, where the reboot demigods were actually driving away the followers of Lord Shiva. So in the 14th chapter, verse number 10, we see Krishna telling Arjuna, sometimes the mode of goodness becomes prominent, defeating passion and ignorance. Sometimes the mode of passion becomes prominent, defeating ignorance. Sometimes the mode of ignorance becomes prominent, defeating goodness and passion. Thereby there's always this competition for supremacy amongst the modes. And interestingly enough, Krishna is telling that to Arjuna for him to fight the conflicts that have arisen within him. Now Arjuna, at the beginning of the battle, he very well knew that he had to fight his elders. He had to fight his family members. How is it that he, at the very moment when his chariot is drawn, he has a sense of bewilderment? Whereas all his other brothers, Yudhishthira and others, they are also virtuous, but they don't feel it that way. It's because the modes externally, they present the same scenario, but internally, the person who is actually in effect with those modes, based on their own disposition, will actually perceive them differently. So Arjuna, even though at the beginning, Krishna in the 14th chapter of the Gita exhibits, he describes the symptoms of each of these modes. With mode of goodness comes clarity, right? There's clarity when there's mode of goodness. With mode of passion, there's impulsive behavior. And mode of ignorance is, there's incoherence. There's just some sort of bewilderment. I don't know what to do. So Arjuna exhibits all of these at the beginning of the battle, when the arguments that he's actually presenting to not fight the war, there's actually clarity in them, because he actually is presenting them through the lens of Shastra. This was what will happen if I were to kill them. But then, impulsively, he just decides to withdraw, and then finally, verse number 6 of chapter 2, he just decides to quit. So he's going through all these modes, and Krishna is telling him that this is how the material world operates. So there'll always be competition amongst these modes. So just through philosophical presenting the philosophy of the modes, he's explained to Arjuna that these are bound to happen. So through the practice of bhakti and through tolerance, one can actually surpass the effects of these modes. So now, interestingly enough, even over here we see Daksha, who is supposedly the level of a Brahmana. He's a Prajapati, but he's acting out of place. And then we see Shiva, or the followers of Shiva, who are Shiva, even though he's not in the mode of ignorance, but he oversees the mode of ignorance. He's actually trying to teach, or is acting. Just a few verses ago, or when he himself was insulted, he didn't actually take any action. But now when he heard the news that Sati, even though she had approached Daksha to make peace, she had actually come there, even though in the earlier chapter it was described that the reasoning that she gives Lord Shiva is that her sisters and everyone else would be there, and she wants to go and see them, but her inner motive was to actually go and describe the glories of Lord Shiva to Daksha, and for him to understand what he was, that he was actually wrong. So when he hears that, then, and how Daksha, being so hard-hearted, that he allowed for Sati to quit her body, that enrages Shiva even more, and then he orders this. So interesting enough, it is said that Daksha couldn't, as a Brahmana, he's meant to control his mind and senses, but he doesn't control his mind and senses, because he takes that small token of, Lord Shiva not standing up to him as a token of disrespect. I was reading in verse number 60 or 61 of chapter 2, where Krishna says, one who controls his mind and senses is a man of steady intelligence. Have you all come across that word, steady intelligence? There's intelligence, but then there's steady intelligence. So just by putting that through Veda base and just seeing in how many places that's referred to, and it comes up every at every passage. And Srila Prabhupada says the steady intelligence comes through hearing. The hearing is what fortifies our intelligence. So, one of Lord Shiva's name is also called Dhira. He's Dhira because he's actually sober. Even though his men or his followers are actually doing what is, Lord Shiva himself didn't do this when he was insulted, but when he sees the external circumstances that have just happened, he then orders his men to do so. Now there's a reference here in this purport about the kidnapping, how Lord Balaram actually punished Dantavakra. Similarly, we find in the 10th canto, during the marriage of Rukmini and Krishna, Rukmini's brother Rukmi was actually very inimical towards Krishna, and he made all attempts for Krishna to not run away with Rukmini. In the end, Krishna, in order to teach Rukmi a lesson, he disfigures Rukmi's mustache. And Balaram, while Krishna is about to kill him, Balaram stops him and tells him that one shouldn't kill one's relative. You've disfigured his mustache and his hair, and that's also enough. And Rukmini feels hurt by the act of Krishna, but then Balaram consoles her by actually presenting that whatever Rukmi did, it was bound to happen because he acted in a way and he's being punished by the laws of karma. So now, in this, as I said, this pastime, we'll see later on that after such fighting, the sacrifice will still carry on. And Brahma would appear, Daksha would be beheaded, and then Brahma would approach Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva would be, satisfied with the prayers, and he'll come and actually place a goat's head on Daksha. And because Lord Shiva is very merciful, so he'll actually be able to, look over what's just happened and excuse and, forgive Daksha for the sacrifice. So, a few points that were made by His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu when I was hearing this, that how small conflicts can turn big and can actually spell ruin for everyone that's engaged in amidst the two parties. As we know, we live in this age of Kali Yuga, which is the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. So two parties or two individuals will actually get into some sort of conflict or disagreement without even a tangible reasoning behind it. Once many years ago, I was listening to His Holiness Radhanath Swami. He said he had just watched a documentary, and this is public, and he said that the Vietnam War, it's interesting enough because this war took place because both the parties got into a war without actually knowing what the reason, what was the reason behind their motive to fight the war. So we see this very commonly happening in Kali Yuga. But here we see this conflict happened because of Daksha's envy of Lord Shiva. And it all starts from way above, way earlier, when Brahma asks Daksha to give Dakshayani or Asati in marriage to Shiva. And from that very moment itself, Daksha was actually not, too favorably inclined toward Lord Shiva because he has his external perception of Lord Shiva as being, walking around crematoriums with dead skulls, and so much so that he just doesn't know, he doesn't want to, but then he's being obliged because of his relationship with Brahma to give his daughter in marriage. So herein the point comes of resentment. we may have resentments in our heart, and if they are not properly processed, or if they're not cleared, then that can actually turn into a bigger problem. A lot of times, as we understand, there are three kinds of kleshas: Adi Bhautik, Adi Devik, and Adi Atmik. Miseries that are caused by our own body and mind, miseries that are caused by other living entities, and miseries that are caused by natural disturbances or natural calamities. Now, of the three, body and mind, yes, we know that happens. Natural disturbances, if you hear of stories of people who have actually been through, areas where there's been some sort of natural calamity, earthquakes, hurricanes, but then people having to suffer because of someone, people having to suffer because of some other living entity or some other individual, that hurts them more than anything else. So a lot of times, even though the reality is, for example, if tomorrow my car breaks down and I can't go where I want it to go, somehow or the other, sooner or later, I will come to accept that this is what's meant. And maybe there's something that I need to look into. Maybe I need to fix my car, but if someone tells me you can't go there tomorrow, and even worse than that, if you don't like that person and you're just acting out of some sort of obligation, then that'll hurt you even more. So Daksha is in that similar predicament where he's been told by Brahma to give his daughter in marriage, but then he gives his daughter in marriage, and since then he's holding on to that sort of a grudge or resentment. And resentments are like pestering wounds. Whatever, for example, we may have some wounds on our body, and those wounds may be visible or not. Now, depends on the extent of those wounds and if it's visible or not. But those wounds, whether it's visible or not, doesn't really define how much of a pain or how much of trouble it's actually causing us. So Daksha is acting out of envy that started from way earlier, and then here you see him just because of the small conflict of Lord Shiva not getting up and offering him respects, and he goes on to say that this is an uncultured person. In reality, by calling someone uncultured, that's a respectful way of saying you don't respect me. We're sugarcoating here by saying that this person doesn't respect me, so I'll call him or her uncultured. So all of this starts with envy, and we see this in so many places. Krishna telling Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, I'm revealing this knowledge to you because you are free from envy. So envy is something that we really have to, as Srila Prabhupada always said, we're in this material world due to envy from Krishna. And a lot of times we don't see it because of our conditioning, and most importantly, because we are so thickly situated in that we don't, somehow or the other, we don't see it. And as we will see later on, there are many instances of envy in the Bhagavatam. In this instance, we'll see this culminating into Daksha's head being severed, and he gets the goat's head. The lesson that we learn from this is that if we have envy, or if there's some sort of in some sort of relationship there is some conflict which we haven't resolved, it can grow to the extent where it will develop into where the outcome would be something like this. Now, obviously, Bhagavatam gives us extremes, but this tells us if envy goes unchecked, then that can lead to public embarrassment. As we see, Daksha will be publicly embarrassed because of what has actually happened. Other instance of envy in the Bhagavatam is Indra coming to steal Maharaj Prithu's 100th horse that was being offered for sacrifice. So each time he would come, each time the 100, because if anyone who would perform 100, 100 Ashwamedha Yagyas, they actually get qualified to become Brahma. So Indra is actually seeing Maharaj Prithu perform these sacrifices, and when it comes to the 100th horse, he comes and steals it. Then his son comes. So much so that, finally Brahma comes and tells Maharaj Prithu, you be happy with the 99th horse sacrifice, let this be all. And then Indra comes to his senses and like, oh, what have I just done? Lastly, in the 10th canto, especially in Vrindavan, we see Krishna killing various demons. If we see his pastime of Kaliya, he doesn't kill Kaliya. He just, he punishes him, but he doesn't kill him. And it is said that as as Krishna is dancing on the hoods of Kaliya, his envy, the poison is actually all he vomits out all of the poison, and then he, by the prayers of the wives of Kaliya, Krishna becomes pacified, and then Kaliya then comes to his senses on what has actually just happened. So like that we see this chapter, I've just finished up to 21, and then the next few verses this chapter will be finished, wherein the culmination would be what will happen with Daksha. So like that we understand just small conflicts that can actually turn big just because of the grudges or resentments that we may actually have. As I said earlier, Bhagavatam gives us extremes, and that's there to teach us a lesson. Now a lot of times even in our own, devotee communities, if, as we see there, Lord Shiva is sitting in his absorption, on the Lord, and he's, for him, he's completely peaceful. And a lot of time, even in our own interactions, we may, whilst we are, in our interaction, there's a option or there's a possibility that we may forget what are we actually trying to do. Our goal is here to somehow serve Shri Shri Radha Gopinath or serve the instruction of a spiritual master, but that can be lost when there are such instances. So this serves as an alarm for us to completely understand what the essence is. A few days ago I was listening to His Holiness Swami Bhagavan Keshava Maharaj, and someone asked him a question that a lot of times in Shastra or things are not black and white. The same instruction may be, us, sometimes our authorities or a spiritual master may tell us, do this, and then someone else may actually come and tell us, do this. How do we discriminate? And Maharaj is describing that's because life itself is complicated. We should seek out the essence of what's being said or what's being told to us. For example, Arjuna, towards the end of the first canto, when he is defeated by the Guyakas, when Krishna's wives are being kidnapped, even though he was the best of archers, he couldn't protect them. At that time, he says that earlier the message of the Gita actually enabled him to fight. Now the message of the Gita is actually, or the instructions of Krishna are actually telling him that to withdraw. So the same instructions, they act as different, point one to different directions, because one should know the essence. And this can be a bit difficult not bit difficult, but quite challenging for us sadhakas, because our minds are so disturbed that we somehow or the other always find it very challenging to to execute instructions in a way that's uplifting our consciousness. Srila Prabhupada would always say, intelligence, the definition of intelligence is looking at the same, coming to the same outcome by using different angles of vision. That's the proper definition of intelligence. In Srila Prabhupada's pastimes itself, especially if we look at the Juhu pastime, towards the end, when Mr. N said, he was just being very ruthless in his dealings and just said, look, Srila Prabhupada said, okay, we will return everything back to you. You just, we'll vacate the land, you give us the money. And then the next morning when Mr. N had actually passed away, or whenever he actually passed away, even though Srila Prabhupada, he's, Ajatashatru, he has no enemies, he regards everyone, he's equally merciful towards all. He said that I had actually prayed to Lord Nrsimhadev to get rid of this Mr. N. Because, again, it's not because he was insulted or he was not honored. He said, I had made a personal promise to Radha Rasbihari that you just stay here and I'll build a temple for you. So because this Mr. N was attacking that premise, it made me, wanting to pray to Lord Nrsimhadev to get rid of this Mr. N. So you see sometimes saintly personalities like Lord Shiva here, one may ask, like, why is he, resorting to violence even though he's completely peaceful and he's absorbed in meditation. But what they're trying to tell us, yes, Daksha, even though he's I think in yesterday's verse, in verse number 12, that the reference, even though it's made in a sarcastic sense, to Daksha being called a Mahatma, but he's actually a Duratma, because he tolerated the death of his daughter. So I will end here. If it's 8:45, and if anyone has a question or a comment, we can take one. Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. You mean in this pastime? In this pastime. Yeah, you see because when we get to the next, the end of this chapter and then especially the next chapter, Lord Shiva comes and, he forgives Daksha for his wrongdoing, and then he actually gives him, he places a goat's head onto him. So if Lord Shiva would have been inimical, then he wouldn't have done so. But you see, he'll be, as it will unfold, that he'll actually give Daksha another chance. So now the parties involved here, if you see, Srila Prabhupada actually writes that after finishing such fighting, the parties would come to a compromise and everything would be settled. And in the end, he says, but later everything would come to a peaceful end. So there's a saying, all's well that ends well. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki, Nita Go Premanandi, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki.